Let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're decoding a really bizarre legal puzzle. How did a simple 4-digit number literally collide head-on with the First Amendment? We're going to look at how a random string of digits triggered a massive federal investigation and a super complex court ruling. All right, let's get into it. So think about this for a second. When exactly does a simple number cross the line and become a quote-unquote true threat under the law? It honestly sounds like a riddle, right? But a single 4-digit sequence, 8647, actually sparked a massive free speech battle. We're talking a standoff that dragged in the Secret Service, the U.S. Park Police, and the federal courts. To understand how we even got to this constitutional crossroads, we really need to look at the history of these numbers first. Okay, quick history lesson. To understand the whole controversy, we have to look at the number 86. Now, according to Merriam-Webster, this actually started out as completely innocent 1930s soda counter slang. You know, restaurant staff used it to say they needed to throw an item out, refuse service to a difficult customer, or just signal to the waitstaff that a specific dish was sold out. It had absolutely zero criminal or violent connotations back then. So how in the world did vintage diner code for "we're out of soup" turn into an intense federal standoff? Well, the modern controversy started with a hyper-local situation right in Washington, D.C. There was this small public interest group called Accountability Now USA, and they set up a demonstration. We're talking a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week protest right outside a D.C. courthouse. Their stated goal? Engaging the public and directly calling for the impeachment and removal of Donald Trump. And to draw attention to their cause, somebody in the group just went on Amazon and bought a giant flag to fly at their protest sign. Now, this controversial flag was visually super simple. It prominently featured the numbers 8647. It was decorated in patriotic red, white, and blue and adorned with white stars. But here is the absolutely crucial point. There were zero symbols of violence on this flag. I mean, no weapons, no skulls, no nooses, literally nothing of the sort. The potential threat then was entirely about how someone might interpret that number rather than any actual violent imagery. But interpret it, they did. And man, just look at how fast this escalated. It started with an initial encounter where the Secret Service approached a volunteer. It was described as a consensual chat just to ask about the flag. Okay, fair enough. But a mere 25 minutes later, 2 different officers came up to that exact same volunteer and began reading them their Miranda warnings. And then, about 2 weeks after that, the whole thing peaked when 4 cars of U.S. Park Police rolled up, citing federal criminal codes, specifically 18 U.S.C. 871, which deals with threats against the president. So what was the government's side of the story? To understand their perspective, we can actually look at a transcript recorded during that very first encounter. The Secret Service officer stated, "We received a phone call because of the flag, in fact, the 8647, and what it can stand for." So you see, the government's inquiry wasn't about the physical flag just taking up space. It was about cracking a perceived code. They were digging into a hidden meaning that somebody from the public had reported to them as potentially dangerous. But then you have the volunteers' defense, which firmly rooted their intent in political expression. When they were questioned about any hidden meaning, the volunteer responded, "I never heard of it standing for anything other than Trump shouldn't be in office." They were essentially just using 86 in that old-school 1930s diner sense, right? Meaning to remove or get rid of, but applied directly to a political figure, the 47th presidency. And the volunteer actually went a step further to clarify their complete lack of violent intent. They explicitly told the officer, "I want Trump to live forever and rot in jail where he belongs." Now, while that is an undeniably harsh and offensive statement to some people, it crucially and explicitly denies any desire for physical violence or assassination. The core of it was demanding legal and political consequences, not physical harm. Okay, so this standoff brings us directly to the central legal threshold for federal Judge Randolph Moss. The big question, is a flag saying 8647 protected First Amendment expression, or is it a true threat? Because First Amendment expression robustly covers core political speech, calls for impeachment, and yes, even deeply offensive opinions in the public square. A true threat, on the other hand, is completely intolerable in a democracy. It involves direct, unambiguous calls for physical violence or harm to government officials. The judge had to figure out exactly which side of the line this flag fell on. So how does a judge actually make that call? Well, according to Judge Randolph Moss's ruling, the ultimate deciding factor is context. He wrote that you simply cannot resolve whether 8647 constitutes a true threat in the abstract. A number is really just a number until you meticulously examine the environment around it, the people displaying it, and the exact manner in which it's being used. Applying this context-driven philosophy, Judge Moss systematically walked through whether he should grant the protesters a temporary restraining order so they could just keep flying their flag. First, he found a likelihood of success on the merits, establishing that the speech was clearly protected. Second, he noted the presence of irreparable harm, because frankly, losing your First Amendment rights for even a single day is a profound harm. Third, he recognized an inadequate remedy at law, basically meaning that handing them financial compensation later cannot replace their right to protest right now. And finally, he weighed the balance of public interest, affirming that democracy absolutely requires free political speech. Having checked all those boxes, the judge granted a 14-day restraining order against the government. Okay, I absolutely love this fascinating, almost poetic little detail from the ruling. To secure this legal victory and actually keep flying the flag, Judge Moss required the plaintiffs to post a financial bond. Guess the amount? Exactly $1. It's this tiny, completely symbolic sum that beautifully underscores the immense constitutional weight of the First Amendment right being protected, especially when compared to a trivial financial requirement. But as you'll see, this hyper-local DC victory did not stay local for very long. We're pivoting now from the concrete sidewalks of a DC courthouse straight to the tranquil beaches of the Outer Banks in North Carolina. Because Judge Moss's ruling on this one single protest flag created a macro-level legal wave that splashed right onto a massive national figure. Let's see how these two seemingly unconnected worlds legally collide. And this brings us to the James Comey indictment. Former FBI Director James Comey was actually indicted over a social media post. The post in question featured a photograph of seashells. Yes, literally seashells. Arranged on a beach, they spelled out that exact same cryptic number, 8647. Comey captioned the photo simply, "Interesting seashell collection I ran across today." The facts actually indicate he didn't even arrange the shells himself. He was just reposting a collection he stumbled upon. Yet, federal prosecutors interpreted this casual beach post of ocean debris as an incitement of violence and a true threat against the president. So let's apply Judge Moss's context test here. The protest flag was located outside a courthouse, engaging in core political speech and featuring clear demands for impeachment with absolutely zero weapons or violent imagery present. Comey's post? Well, it was a casual beach photo on social media with no violent imagery, no guns, and no targets. He was reposting a collection with zero explicit calls for physical harm. If the protest flag isn't a true threat based on its context, Comey's post shares a virtually identical nonviolent context. Now, of course, there are differing interpretations of this speech. And to really understand the prosecution's angle, we have to look at Donald Trump's public perspective on this. When talking about the number 86, Trump stated, "If anybody knows anything about crime, they know 86. It's a mob term for kill him." So from this viewpoint, the number isn't harmless diner slang at all. It's inherently violent language, and therefore sharing it constitutes a direct, menacing threat. But in almost the exact same breath, the absolute complexity of proving a true threat was highlighted by Trump himself. When he was asked directly in an interview if he truly felt his life was in danger because of Comey's seashell post, Trump admitted, "But do you really think your life was in danger? Because probably, I don't know." This admission of uncertainty perfectly illustrates the incredibly steep hill prosecutors face in these cases. If the alleged target of the threat isn't even sure they're being threatened, proving an objective threat beyond a reasonable doubt becomes exceptionally difficult. And that leads us to the massive legal takeaway from this explainer. Judge Moss's ruling for a small group of protesters in DC has essentially handed a ready-made legal blueprint to James Comey's lawyers. They can now point directly to a federal judge who definitively ruled that the number 8647, when it completely lacks any surrounding violent context, is protected First Amendment speech. But even more broadly, the single ruling gives all of us leverage. It sets a precedent that protects everyday citizens' digital speech from being criminalized, taken out of context. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. If context truly is the ultimate judge of our First Amendment rights, how do we accurately interpret cryptic speech in our rapid-fire digital age? A nylon flag on a street corner and a photo of seashells on a social media feed are vastly different mediums. Yet under the law, they may share the exact same constitutional protections. It's just a fascinating look at how our justice system has to adapt to the weird nuances of human expression. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those great questions, and I'll see you next time.